Today is the first, and then they'll have 2 additional talks later in the semester in October. For those of you who are joining us remotely, if you have comments or questions, we'll be monitoring the chat. So feel free to drop your comments there, and I'll be monitoring it throughout the event. Okay, so I'm really pleased to introduce and welcome Mac Love, the co-founder and chief catalyst at Art by Love, a creative agency based in Akron, Ohio, but who do work all over. We're excited to hear Mac's presentation. His work with At Play and Steps to Equity have been nationally recognized. And also my colleague, Mayura Faria, saw Mac's presentation in San Diego a couple of months ago. And we're really excited to be able to share this information with you. Mac's going to share principles, methods, and tools that guide and inform the projects that Art by Love do and demonstrate how they are systemically shifting the way people, communities, and cities invest in arts and their environment. So with that, if you would all join me in welcoming Mac Love.
Hey, thank you, everybody. I'm just going to make sure that people are not seeing that little notification on there about the recording. Got it. All right. Well, I really appreciate the showing and turnout, and I'm really excited for the world that you all work in and the things that you're going to be doing with this work, not just now, but like into the future. The story I'm going to be telling today is coming at art from a very different angle. I will go ahead and say too, also a very privileged one. I had a lot of unique experiences that gave me a kind of unique vantage point on some things. And I just want to share some of the thinking and really kind of for the first time I've ever tried as a presentation to talk about a kind of different conception of the way we think about art and the way we can integrate it into all aspects of our lives. So to start things off, let's make sure we can actually even advance the presentation here.
I think there were some people.
Oh, were there still? Hopefully Terry can let them in, but here, you know what? Just in case, let me go back and see. Well, while I could do that, I want you to just think about this question. Oh, actually, no, I'll pose it to them too, but what is the most beautiful thing you have ever experienced? Let's see. I'm gonna hope that in the background, they are letting people in as we go here. Is that the case, Terry? Okay, great. Thank you. It is when I put on presentation mode. Okay. So I want to start with just this question, because I think this is something that we take for granted or maybe don't always share with everyday people because of how impactful they can be. But really, what is the most beautiful thing you have ever experienced? I'm not just talking about a piece of artwork, a piece of music, the entire context of it. Like, think about that. I bet every single one of you has something like that. It could be a meal you ate, an experience you shared with somebody. Think of the context of what made that so significant for you. How old you were, what you were doing beforehand, what you did afterwards, whether it was something that was shared or something unique to you. Very often those deeply, deeply felt experiences are primary drivers for our inspiration and our sense of creative fulfillment in anything that we do. And then we also want to think about the social responsibility of that. Those are our unique experiences. I live in Akron. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this story of Jalen Walker being shot this summer. He was shot over 40 times by police officers and was unarmed. The lived experiences of everyone in this world are radically, radically different. This is obviously an incredible tragedy. And a lot of the work I'm going to be sharing with you today is about working in different environments, particularly places that I'm not from, and some of the responsibilities that come with doing that in a responsible and empathetic way. But I wanted to share that too, because, it's very important. And I've been lucky. Part of that privilege of moving around a lot, as I did when I was younger, was going into new environments. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Zeno's paradox. It's a early philosophical principle about how the space between 2 points is infinite. And the early philosophers were wondering, well, how do we get anywhere? I mean, do people even move? Like if there are an infinite number of points between A and B, like how exactly do you get there? And the reason I want to share that is because the gulf of the difference between our lived experiences, I don't believe is insurmountable. We can still get from point A to B, and it's about having the will and the faith and kind of the courage to go ahead and make those steps, because you do get across and we can make those connections, whether it's across individual lives, cultures, or the landscape itself. For myself, the earliest childhood experience, the one that was the most profound and beautiful for me, was witnessing a rare atmospheric event in the Virgin Islands in the United States. I saw something called a serin. It's a rare atmospheric phenomenon where the sun reflects off of the sky and the ocean at the dawn of the morning, and the reflected light can catch gentle rainfall as it's falling, but the light isn't strong enough to illuminate the clouds above you. So where you're standing when you witness it is in night with the stars above you, but the reflected light from the sun, which has not yet crested the horizon, hits the rain, and it has this illusion of looking like stars just raining and washing over everything. Now, I may have seen it twice. I was 3 years old when I saw it for certain the first time. I may have seen it again at 5, but at the time I was so young, I honestly did not quite believe that maybe that had happened. Like maybe it was a dream. I had night terrors as a kid. I used to sleepwalk. I actually think I walked into seeing that experience. But for most of my adult life and young life, I didn't even know that there was a word for it or that it was a thing. I thought it was just like a figment of my imagination, but it was something I could tap into creatively. It's just this potential for a sensation or an experience, something really just massively expansive. And part of that lived experience was then this privilege. My dad worked on the first Where's the Beef campaign. All right. So, you've got these magical realities. Then you've also got, commercial culture and the way we sell things and how these ads get made. And something that was really interesting about this was that line, "Where's the beef?" was not actually the line that was scripted in this. The woman who gave that line in this had emphysema and she couldn't quite say the entire line. So she just started saying, "Where's the beef?" And they had the camera rolling when they did it. So she actually was genuinely confused when she was shooting this ad. And it's kind of funny to think now, but back in those days, advertisers as a new frontier felt a profound sense of responsibility for the creative work that they would share. Like, would kids be disturbed if they saw a genuinely confused adult on the screen? And so those were some of the thinking and some of the responsibility that I grew up with, not just in terms of advertising, but like marketing communications. Now, when it comes to art, and what we think of art, like this is Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi. When most people think of art, they think of something priceless and precious, a rare artifact. This sold for $450 million. I believe it was just 2 years ago at an auction. And art is this huge asset class, this tremendous emerging asset class. Let's see, the reported returns of art now are 10% on an annual basis in fine art markets. So there is a large concentration of wealth that is really steering art as we understand it as a commodity. Just in the past year, 25 artists of all time, just 25 people are responsible for almost half of all post-war and contemporary art auction sales to date. Let's see, that small group of artists has combined for $1.2 billion in sales. That's 44.6% of all auction art sales in the past year. That represents 5% of the total brand value of all sports teams in North America combined. So think about that as this idea of art. But then what about like our kids' art that are on our refrigerators? The things that bring us joy in life, or those little serendipitous things you discover with a piece of music or something else. How do we equate those values, both as a commodity, but also the role that they play in our lives? And part of the reason I want to share this is because I think that that's a gulf that we can talk about and that we can address as creative professionals, as urban planners, as designers. So when I was in school, I studied psychology, philosophy, and art. I really wanted to understand the underlying principles that fed into the way we think about advertising, marketing, and communication. I got really into Otto Rank. He was an understudy of Sigmund Freud. And I'm just going to read something. I wrote this a while back, so there may be some quotes in here from other things, but Otto Rank perceived immortality as a common spiritual root for the meaning and origin of collective ideologies, which animated all other ideologies as it grew further untenable. The feeling of immortality is not only the result of creating, but the presupposition upon which it rests. Artistic creativity and the human creative impulse originates solely in the constructive harmonizing of the fundamental dualism of all life. The creative impulse leads to the liberation and forming of individual personality. Art is the inward necessity of who we are. You do not need to be an artist to live in truth. Art determines the artist as science its disciples. All human problems are, in the last resort, problems of the soul. Now, I wanted to put that out there because I always run into people every day who are like, I'm not an artist. I can't draw a stick figure. And that always bothered me as somebody, as like a young kid. I grew up with art in my environment. I wasn't allowed to watch TV, so I'd make mazes. Art came easy to me. That was kind of a privilege. But it bothered me that other people didn't even want to try to do the thing that I thought was like the most fun. That we had kind of conditioned people to think that their creative expression was somehow not permissible or not valid or not of value. And so I kind of set it as kind of a mission in my life to try to find ways to flip that. Because I tended to find that when people would engage their creative impulse, they kind of got hooked. They realized it was fun, that it's okay to make mistakes, that you don't have to do a photorealistic portrait. There are all kinds of creative expression that have value. And I tried to build that into my practice, whether it's encouraging people to write a letter to a friend or to take credit for their culinary experiments, like whatever it might be. That creative impulse is something that we all share and that I think significantly helps us bridge these divides. So I don't know if it's dark enough for this to actually work in here, if anyone's ever seen this, but I'd like you to focus on that dot right there. Just please don't take your eyes off of it. I want you to kind of keep it on there for a while. There's a lot of things that separate us as individuals from our backgrounds. Thank you. The way we grew up, the way we think. But on a physiological level, there's some interesting things that are universal about us, including the way our brains work, the way our senses work. 5% of the population is colorblind, but there's still a majority that kind of brain interprets color the same way. And so keep your eye on that dot for a second. Did anybody see the flash of color, full color in the image when it switched over? All right, that's a reflexive behavior that happens when your brain gets hypersaturated with just one thing. It will actually fill the blank space with something else. And in this case, when you saturate the colors in this way, it fills it with the true color of the image for a split second. And so to me, I'm like, that's magic. That put me in touch with that kind of serene feeling as a kid. Like, wow, I can like do that to anybody. And so I was really curious about the whole phenomenology of that. So I went to a school where I could create my own major. I studied something called synesthesis, which is we're talking like back in Galileo days or when this was first conceived of. It means the harmony of different or opposing impulses produced by a work of art. If you're familiar with synesthesia, it's the confusion of the senses. That's how most people understand it. A lot of musicians talk about it more frequently these days when they see colors, when they play tunes. There are people who tell time by shape. There's all kinds of ways where our brains cognify information in a multisensory way. And so I loved this because as someone who grew up abroad, I grew up in Brussels, Belgium, I thought it could allow me to create a permission space for people to talk about their unique perspective and experience, not because it is only one particular way, but because the way we feel as individuals has validity, not just for us, but for others. And to understand the panoply of that is kind of a big responsibility for us as designers and creatives. And so, I was an artist, so I also was messing around. So I was building infinity boxes. This was something I did in 2000, before I'd even heard of Yayoi Kusama. I just thought it was really cool to have a clock reflected into infinity and wonder like what's going on in the dark where the light can't reach. I would do mass blindfolding exhibits and encourage people to wear blindfolds for more than 5 minutes so their other senses could take over. And that's, if you've never done that before, it's a cheap, fun way to throw a party. Stick the blindfolds in your wine glasses. That was our distribution method. We were the first art group at Edinburgh College of Art to be paid at hourly rate by the university because we were operating the wine table during this. And it went on for like I mean, people, I think the average length of time that we measured was about 43 minutes with people wearing their blindfolds. It was just really fun. And it's interesting when you do it, how your other senses start to tell you about whether or not someone is being honest or truthful, if they're comfortable. You know, you can tell things if they're close or far away. Sometimes not even when they're talking, just by body heat. And it's interesting how you can form your worldview sometimes, not just with, with sometimes these little restrictions. I also got involved in war protests. Fox News called me a graphic art terrorist for climbing up and painting this hot submarine shaped sign in the nuclear submarine capital of the United States. It had fallen into disrepair. I used water soluble paint. I returned from living abroad, and it was weird to me that no one in a military community was talking about the second war in Iraq. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to create a third space. I'll just paint this submarine sign yellow. Well, that sign is 1/5 the size of an actual submarine. I did not bring enough paint. I couldn't even reach to the top of it. And it actually, I mean, it provoked a whole thing. Homeland Security got called. The Patriot Act was used to surveil and get the license plate I used. I didn't hide. I had a very valid reason for why I was doing it. But the sad part about it is that people came out to remove the paint. Instead of trying water or a sponge or anything, they actually used paint scrapers, and they completely shredded the original sign and actually made it even uglier than it had been beforehand. But I wanted to share this because it was interesting. I got to meet a congressman a year later. I was bartending at an event. He knew about this, told me a great story about his first day on the floor of Congress with it. But one of the questions he asked me was, what did you learn from this? Because I received death threats. There were all kinds of things that went on there. You go to Stonington or Mystic, Connecticut, and you will hear this song playing in the bars all the time. It's kind of a point of pride for people with like a little bit of an irreverent spirit. But he asked me, like, what would you do different? And I was like, I would definitely be part of the cleanup crew, find a way to do that, because I wanted them to do this sign right and treat it with respect and integrity. But obviously I also had a statement I needed to make, something disruptive I wanted to do. But beyond that, a bit of irresponsibility, there's also working back in the advertising and brand world. So I got into packaging design. That's where I met my wife, how I ended up in Ohio. My father's from North Olmsted. I'm a diehard Cleveland sports fan. I always wanted to live here. I met a girl from Akron while working for a packaging design company in the Empire State Building. And it was a great experience for me because it allowed me to apply a lot of these creative principles I was studying into everyday life. And I wanted to share this because this was another valuable lesson that I learned that we applied to a lot of our art and urban planning projects. Wild turkey used to look like this up here in the top left corner. And they wanted to release a new 80 proof variety of wild turkey. Most people had forgotten about it. They wanted to compete with Jack Daniels, and they were willing to get rid of the name Wild Turkey completely. They thought it was just scorched earth branding. Like everybody had gotten sick on wild turkey at some point in their life because they didn't dilute the 101. And so they genuinely thought like this would be the only route for them to go for new packaging design. New name, they were like, get rid of the turkey. Don't even mention our brand, no association. And so when we did consumer testing nationwide, and I traveled around to all of these tests, everyone by and large loved the new bottles, the new shapes. That was what people wanted. But if you ask people 10 years from now if they saw themselves buying the same product, they would say no, not at all. I would get the one that says Wild Turkey because I know it's been around for a long time. It must be good for a reason, like it has earned that success. So I would probably go back and buy Wild Turkey instead. And that was a valuable insight because a lot of the way that we do research can really dramatically impact our decision-making processes. And I try to apply the most responsible methods that I can towards a lot of my public art projects. Because if you do something like, if you ask a resident, do you want splash pads? They'll be like, yeah, splash pads are cool. I would love a splash pad. But if you don't tell them that it's going to come at the expense of their public pool and that's going to be replaced, well, that's going to be a problem for a lot of them. And a lot of cities, sometimes they'll hire consultants or they'll try to do the work themselves. And they don't realize sometimes that the order in which they're asking questions is skewing their answers and they're not really collecting reliable data. And that has a really painful, profound impact on a lot of communities. And I've found it's not a space that in art people talk about all that much. Art is predominantly treated like a luxury, not a necessity. And I think it's built into everything. So when I first moved here, sorry for the low res of this, this was a really old photo. There was this chalk wall underneath the Main Avenue Bridge. And I was doing business development for an ad agency in the Ernst & Young Tower and started going out and doing these 10-foot tall chalk murals because I hated the fact that my clients were seeing like sometimes just juvenile expressions on the walls. You know, it's like no one was doing anything with this wall. So of course it just ended up getting kind of polluted with all kinds of nonsense. So I started doing these, and over that span of time, this corridor became a place where you would not go there at night. Like that was not the route to take, to where people were coming and getting their wedding pictures taken there. I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. I knew that art could work that way, but it was nice to kind of be placing it in the public space in a different way. But it was also interesting to see how it could change and inspire and impact people in a community. So this is actually the Rickroll video from the Cavs. I don't know if anybody saw this, but that is the chalk murals that we did in the background of all this. So no notification of any of this, but it was kind of funny. A friend of mine was at the game, was like, yo, you are on like the Jumbotron screen at the Cavs game. And so that was pretty fun. And then another friend in Seattle, this was like weeks later, Bone Thugs and Harmony used those same chalk murals in a music video for Coming Home. And all the friends who made fun of me for always wanting to live in Ohio were like, okay, you're kind of Cleveland official now. Like even my Cleveland friends, they were like, you've got an irrational love of Ohio. But things started to change. Maybe some teams win some games, maybe quality of life improves, maybe we have some infrastructure improvements, other things that maybe change the way that we feel about the space. But I continue to pursue these opportunities to do other art. You may have seen this across the street over at Fifth Street Arcades. This is a holographic mural, so the colors change depending on your angle of perception. It's done on an iridescent paper. I really enjoy making artwork that causes people to move in just a different way. In this case, it was to try to lure them in from the street. These were the murals we did for Cleveland Metro Parks, which preceded then the building of the new Edgewater facility. Art has this interesting way when something is not quite working to inspire curiosity and to lead people to change their behaviors. And it became interesting to me to see how if I planted art in the right place, investment followed. Now, there's a lot of research about the role of art, and a lot of it has to do with the interior environment. This was done, a study from the British Council of Offices in 2012. Big study, I think they spent about 15 years working on this. If 80% of business costs is people, and 93% say art makes the workplace feel more welcoming, and 60% say it stimulates their creativity, like, couldn't that apply to our own environment too? I mean, if research shows that art increases productivity in the workspace by 15 to 30%, like that's like minimum. What could that do in our environment in terms of the way we treat each other, our own quality of life? And so we created the company Art by Love. It really is a kind of fusion of fine art and branding. And we've been kind of hanging our hat on saying the we make art work point these days, because what we're really trying to do is encourage businesses, organizations, and communities to try to resource and take a more responsible approach to the way that they do their artwork and the way they treat their artists. Too often it's kind of like, oh, hey, we're doing this event. We'd like something colorful there. Can you just create something for us so we can have a nice photo op? And that kind of approach is really painful and can be really destructive too. Building consistent trust requires a different approach. So we take a lot of our brand experience. Like I've worked at Marvel, I've done work for Disney. I take a lot of those multi-million-dollar brand responsibilities and apply the same methodologies to the way that we do public art. Just in the last, I guess it's been 7 years now. Yeah, we've done 300 paid projects for local artists, over 200 murals, 100 placemaking transformations. And then just since the start of the pandemic, we got into making activity books. I brought a bunch of them with me. I'll share them with you after this. A lot of organizations couldn't use their travel budgets during the pandemic. So they were like, how can we still check the box of having a community meeting? And someone knew about some activity books I'd created for another project. And so I made our first one for the Clark Fulton neighborhood in Cleveland. That then led to a citywide activity book for the city of Buffalo. We've now done them for Los Angeles, Tacoma, Boston, Newark. I think we've done 3 for Cleveland, and they've been translated into 5 languages. What's really nice to me about this is most people, if you don't have internet access, you're not going to get them in the survey. If you're doing 3 p.m. meetings on a Wednesday to say you did a community meeting, a lot of people can't make that. There's a huge voice of residents and community members that people say we're doing work for that are really not being included. And these activity books created a platform for a lot of those voices to make to the table, particularly younger ones, which is really cool and heartwarming when you start to see what they submit. But I want to take you to now a different project here. Let's see how I'm doing on time. All right, so I've got this creative thinking. I've got this design experience. How can I really demonstrate that this works? I got really lucky in Akron. In 2017, I won a $240,000 Night Cities grant, which is a non-matching grant. And as a for-profit, I did not have any political requirements or allegiances. I could choose how to invest that money completely independently from anybody else. And when we were awarded the grant, Akron had 21 neighborhoods. That's what the map looked like. But literally 2 weeks after we won the grant, Akron changed its neighborhood footprint to 24 neighborhoods. They added 3 new neighborhoods. They absorbed 1 neighborhood into another, and they renamed 3 of them. So you can imagine if you've been living in one of these neighborhoods your entire life, if this was Lane Worcester and now it's become Sherbondi Hill, you've got some questions like, what does that mean? Why? And we got to kind of enter into that conversation at a really interesting point. For this project, what we wanted to do was to activate and reinvigorate all of the neighborhoods in Akron. So we reorganized our funds and our planning to address the 24 neighborhood plan. And our work, what we committed ourselves to is we're going to go down every single street in every single neighborhood. We are only going to do street intercepts. I mean, we'll attend community meetings, award meetings, but we're going to meet the people who live in all the neighborhoods, talk to them where they're at. We are going to distinguish in our research whether we're talking to a resident, a stakeholder, or someone who's just passing through, because the perceptions are wildly different, particularly also the value assessments. We didn't just go biking down every street. We also took all of those weird paths that you see between neighborhood corridors. This is actually a path through the woods in a Bhutanese community in Chapel Hill that leads up to a shopping district with like ropes that they like pull themselves up. And because at the time, this was 2017, we couldn't reliably share technology on our devices. So we had maps of every neighborhood with a universal legend that we would use. And I worked with students and residents, and we would go down every street and kind of catalog, where is their construction? Where is their art? Where are their playgrounds? Where are there areas that are cut off from the rest? Where there may be opportunity zones? And we would survey residents. Based on that initial walking through every street, we would put together in the top right, you can see this kind of menu of analogous ideas sourced from residents about what people wanted that they thought would improve quality of life. And we didn't restrict it to our budget. If somebody wanted a new school or something massive, our goal was to try to collect data about what was of greatest relevance to the people living in those neighborhoods, then to share it with the city, stakeholders, and other partners so that it could at least further inform and augment the way they were thinking. And that ended up being really valuable because we found that 85% of the people that we talked to had never participated in a public forum before. That's a big missing voice in a lot of our resident research. And what we would gain from that insight was not so much that cities and community organizations had the wrong ideas about what residents want, but more often than not, they had the wrong priorities. Normally what they thought might be number 1 was really actually number 5. It might be number 1 to a stakeholder who wants something that's nice that they can take, a visitor to, but for a person who's living in the neighborhood on a daily basis, they might have other needs. We also found that questions were being asked the wrong way. So one of the most popular things that was voted on in a lot of neighborhoods was a community garden. But we found most residents in follow-up questions, they didn't know where their existing community gardens were. And if you ask them, if you built a super community garden, if it had a permanent cover, if it was accessible and had set scheduled hours, if there were events, would you continue to use it 8 years from now, 10 years from now? And almost all the time they would say, no, I wouldn't. What I really just want is better food choices. I want it to be free. And if you can bring it to me, that would be great. And so that's not to just say anything bad about community gardens, but there's ways of making some of these services work more effectively for residents. And so we shared a lot of that knowledge. We planned everything out In total, we produced over 98 initiatives. This is actually when we would digitize our data. It was really just a PowerPoint slide where we would kind of collate everything that people had collected, populate it like this, and we would share this with the city engineers and leaders. They started to tell us, like, my God, like, you know more about the environment than anybody. Like, they were just at the time trying to figure out where all the fire hydrants were and to put that into a GIS map. And so they told us, if you ever do this again, and this will come later, they're like, it'd be really great if you could capture this data using GIS or geospatial analysis. So I was like, okay. But here's where it ended up. This is our new, more vibrant map of Akron, something that is not pastel, that actually, there's brand elements behind these colors as well. But this was our project summary. So in 18 months, we invested the full $240,000 across all 24 neighborhoods. We interviewed. Okay, everybody, sorry for that. I'm going to share the screen again. Should be good now. Okay. So I'll skip through a few things here since I just lost some time, but okay, so basically, think about this. I'm not from Akron. I get $240,000. And it's like, okay, what is this stranger who's not from this place going to be doing with this money? This was like my 30th grant application with the Knight Foundation, and I hadn't never made it as a finalist until this. I learned a lot of interesting things about that process. You know, when it says, you know, if applications are selected based on merit, like what that means. Like, if you don't really know the people who are going to be voting, like, it's hard for them because they want to trust whoever they're going to give the money to. And my goal was to create the greatest return on investment that the Knight Foundation had ever seen, at least in Akron. There were a lot of stories of things where people had been awarded projects for art projects, but they didn't budget it properly. They couldn't complete things or do things of a high quality. And that had been, in my brief time in living in Akron at that point, a painful thing to see, because a lot of work was being done, you know, for communities by people who didn't live there and was not being done of a high quality. And so there'd be a colorful photo op, but then a year later, it would be completely destroyed because they didn't use materials designed to withstand an Ohio winter, you know, or they claimed to have surveyed residents when really they only talked to like 8 people. And it's the same older people who attend the ward meetings. And so our approach was kind of unique. This is a little bit of what it looked like. I mean, really, I hired 168 different artists. We paid minimum wage for us was $15 an hour. Most often I would actually pay artists twice what they were asking. A lot of that was because I wanted higher quality materials. Many of the muralists we hired had never actually done a mural before. It was just a matter of whenever possible, I would pair an aspiring artist with a professional who could mentor them in the right methodology and approach, like using a projector to scale up an 8.5 by 11 sketch that's just amazing so that they could paint a really cool, like 16 by 16 foot mural. We built a parkour trail. We refurbished basketball courts. We intentionally made these investments in corridors that never get it in Akron, the places that really only the residents see. In total, we did over 100 creative collaborative murals with community members. And a big part of that was because a lot of people wanted to see their own values expressed back to them. And we found a lot of people who we knew that they wanted to have a hand in the change or in a positive difference. We made mobile splash toys that could be plugged into fire hydrants anywhere in the neighborhood to take that sense of water play anywhere. We created a theater production that toured 24 different locations across the neighborhoods, free to the public, in parks, in remote locations. I mean, this was like a wild experiment. Not everything was successful. Like, we had one of those theater performances, we had 0 people show up to. There was another one we only had 1 person show up to, and it's because he just accidentally parked his car to eat lunch in his car at the spot where we were giving the performance. You know, sometimes that's just the way, you know, it is. Maybe, you know, the marketing communications didn't make it out, whatever it might be, but it was just a lot. And it caught the attention of Mitchell Silver. At the time, he was the commissioner of the New York City's Parks Department. He came to Akron to give a presentation, and one of my colleagues who was working on this project with me went up on the stage afterwards, told him about the project, and he reached out afterwards and basically wanted me to check in with him every 6 months and let him know kind of how it was going, because he thought it was sort of unique, the approach we were taking. Before we would go into any neighborhood, we would go to the library, we would research all the local history, not just like past history, but recent. Had there been murders, fires? Did the neighborhood start off as a clay mine? What manufacturing used to take place there? Then we would go down the streets and talk to people. So if people didn't know the history of their own neighborhood and had questions, we might actually have some of the answers. We really tried to kind of thoroughly vet ourselves so we would be informed before we started our work. But despite the praise, the impact and everything, our grant was not renewed. We were operating for the last 6 months of the project with the understanding that we would get to continue. So we didn't stop making. We were actually told, like, keep going, don't worry, this is like the best thing ever. And then we found out 2 weeks before the project was over, like, nope, like it's done. And I had a hard time with that. That was painful, because I had committed to projects that took another 6 months to finish afterwards, and I had no resources to do it. And so I just contributed a ton of money and time to keep every promise I made. But I asked people, particularly some city leaders afterwards, like, why? Like, what happened? Like, what was the reason? And I had multiple city council members tell me, you did too much, you did it too fast, and you did it too well. Essentially, what they were saying, and I found they told me this too, is we made all the organizations that were responsible for the work we were doing look bad. They were nonprofits. They would have been given hundreds of thousands of dollars in operational expenses to do work in some of these neighborhood corridors or to address some of these needs. And the truth is, they're the ones who should be charged with doing that work. And so Akron completely changed the way that it invests in its neighborhoods, the way it works with residents. Just this year, the city is making a $25 million investment in its Parks and Recreation Department. It's the largest in its history. In the year after we completed the At Play project, Akron launched the Great Streets program, which had $5 million in funding to support business corridors across key neighborhoods. It created the Akron Parks Collaborative, which has received over $1 million to fix parks and recreation spaces. They funded an Akron cultural plan to come up with an idea and sense and a strategy of what Akron is and how it should be invested in the future. The Akron Art Commission, local leaders who actually review all public art projects and have to approve everything before anything can be done in a public space. They also created neighborhood partnership grants to fund projects sourced directly from residents in those neighborhoods. In total, from when we started this project in 2017, the Parks and Recreation Department had a $5.1 million budget total, which was part of a larger department budget of $9.4 million. This year, today, they have $64 million. This had been a massively neglected area and need in Akron. If you're not familiar with it, 85% of the people who have full-time jobs in Akron do not actually live within the city limits. That creates a really distorted perception of what is in those environments, who the people are, what the quality of life is. And so that's some of what I wanted to bring up with how it's systemic change. I'm going to flip through this project a little fast to get to the more interesting thing here. Remember when I said the city said, if you can capture this information again, you do it using GIS? Well, we didn't have the funds to do it, but we decided to do it anyway. We had a lot of students who didn't want to stop working on the project, so we created one that was right in their backyard. We walked every single intersection in the University Park neighborhood. We cataloged and assessed 7 criteria as a daytime and nighttime assessment with a specific focus on contributing factors to walkability and perception of safety. This was like our low rent rip out report of all of these factors, which gives a ton of insight into the built environment. Again, I apologize that I'm skipping through this. But what quickly arose was that our insights were sometimes going against neighborhood planning that had investment going on for 3 to 5 years, such as bike lanes, where it really just didn't work and kind of failed fast. Lighting programs where lights were going to be installed. You can see on the bottom right-hand corner, those lighting corridors. Those were not actually the darker corridors of the neighborhoods. That's just where the utility company wanted to replace its lights because they needed to be upgraded. we could plot out maps for city services of where all the broken utilities were. Now, there are a lot of efficiencies here that we would hear from city members were helping because people aren't always reporting things anymore. We have an issue with trust between political leadership and residents. So if you have an army of people going down every street, it can kind of give you some interesting insight and reports into what is needed. The experience of doing the work changed perception of the neighborhood. Students were more interested in living in the neighborhood, working in the neighborhood. They thought it was safer than they had previously thought it was because they weren't driving through it. They weren't going through it looking for potential risks. They were seeing the positives, which you don't do when you're driving at a high speed. You're in a defensive mood and mindset. Now, this is the project I wanted to kind of focus on. I know we're kind of running short on time, so we'll record this and share it later. John Carroll University won a grant in the pandemic. They were another organization that couldn't do the work they planned to because people couldn't meet. So a mutual friend referred them to me as someone who might be able to do something interesting to get smart about a neighborhood. This was in the Buckeye Shaker neighborhood. Joshua Perkins McCann is a local leader there. Again, we're talking about like the real lived experiences and issues that people are facing in communities. And in Buckeye Shaker, it was quality of life for the kids. It was also a massive disparity in terms of where investment is kind of going. And that was a true story in Akron too. So we researched every ongoing project in the neighborhood to make sure we were not duplicating efforts, to make these organizations aware of the work we were doing so that we could share our insights with them and hopefully provide efficiencies for them. We worked with students and residents, and we walked every single street in Buckeye Shaker only during daytime. This was not a nighttime assessment, focusing on walkability. But we also wanted to capture ideas. What did the residents and the students think would be most impactful in the environment? We interviewed people where they were at, same kind of approach, but we logged all the data geospatially. Has anyone here used ESRI software or ArcGIS before? Okay, I love this because it allows me to put some objective data and parameters on and measure the impact of some of what I do creatively. That art is not just a luxury, it's a necessity, because I can now start to capture over time how crime rates are affected by where public art is located, how property values are affected, perception of safety. Buckeye Shaker has a crazy, horrible sidewalk issue. Over 1,200 pieces of failed sidewalks. Unlike our University Park neighborhood project, when we went down every street, we didn't just do intersections. We gave our students and team members the ability to log single point insights. So we cataloged every piece of failed sidewalk within a 10-foot radius. So if you were standing in a spot and all 3 of them were busted up, well, that was just 1 point. But we also cataloged if the sidewalk was broken, missing, uprooted, sunken, because we wanted to be able to plot out a map for the city of how can we actually overcome this insurmountable challenge. Qualitative risk analysis. Now, this is not my area of expertise, but I think it's kind of interesting when cities and other organizations decide where to place investments, that they use this methodology of the likelihood of the failure and the potential impact or consequences of that failure. Because when I go into these environments, and what we're actually seeing is an already failed state in many locations, but those failed states are considered negligible by many. A busted piece of sidewalk, that's too bad. 1,200 busted pieces of sidewalk in Buckeye Shaker mean people are taking their wheelchairs on the streets because they can't actually take it anywhere else. There's incredible risk in the environment, but it hasn't been historically getting invested in. So that's starting to change. The methodology of us just doing this also changed perception of the neighborhood. I think this is really healthy, like just going out, getting out of your comfort zone and going for a walk. We had people who just signed up to do this because they walk anyway. And you just got to take them to new corridors. They found new businesses, new playgrounds, new recreation areas. We created a story map. This is all free and publicly accessible with all of the data logged on it. So anyone, residents, leaders can go and actually see where all of the excellent, bad points are in the neighborhood in any of these criteria. There's also visuals attached to every single one of these. So if we wanted to show a city member where the busted storm drain is, they can actually see exactly how it's broken. Like, is the storm drain missing entirely? Is it just sunken? Does new concrete have to be poured? With sidewalks, you can kind of see, like, I love being able to see this geospatial stuff because it reminds me of the branding and packaging. It's equity analysis. It's where are we strongest? Where are there the greatest areas of need? How can we most dramatically impact perception, experience, and behavior in these environments? And an important thing to note when we do these assessments, areas where you don't see dots, it's important to know, like, that's like good. Like, excellent had to be outstandingly excellent. All the areas we don't see this, like, that's a positive experience. You know, this is not a complaint box. It's not a tool to log anything. We have objective parameters by which we measure every single one of these criteria. We also created a dashboard. So over a period of time, we can track progress of any investment and impact in the neighborhood if we get to do this assessment again. We created an activity book, developed 3,000 copies of it, distributed them across the neighborhood. It was a mix of educational information, participatory design exercises, received hundreds of submissions, ideas for public art, ideas for what businesses should go into the corridors. My favorite, please, if anyone ever has excess grant money, I would love to build the vomit slide and Buckeye Shaker. I would go to it. I would take my kids just to go down the vomit slide, and this very, do not laugh. This was a very serious idea in this road. I just think it's so sweet. There are so many expressions of love and kindness that come through these books, mainly because people are working within a comfort space. They're not being dominated by an alpha personality. It's a safe space they can express themselves freely. Painful things get expressed in these too, but it's a good voice to be able to get and to hear. This is Jennifer. She's one of the residents who worked with us on the project. You know, it was, I thought her statement was, there were flowers where there once was concrete. For her, it was interesting because walking down every street, it actually helped her see all the investments the city was making. If she hadn't gone down the street, she wouldn't necessarily known or noticed how those small incremental investments, like just when someone comes up and clean up litter, how much of an impact that can make. It made her more hopeful, and it made her recognize that actually there is a lot of good also going on in the neighborhoods. We're now at a stage right now where we are working with Land Studios on a public art project over near Woodhill Homes. This is paired with the We Wear the Mask program, which is a separate thing they've got funding for. This is over on the Metro RTA garage. So I was just at Harvey Rice Library yesterday asking kids and residents which concepts they like and then why. These are very preliminary. This is just like for directional input. Things that are sourced, this is actually from Woodhill Homes. That's a sculpture that's on the side of some of the homes there that many people don't even realize is there. Local figures, Luna Park, an old recreation space that no longer exists out there. We also were testing ideas that we'd sourced from residents. Really kind of cool to see kids who are 12 years old and younger put sidewalk repair as a priority for them when they have a choice of having a new playground, you know, or a cultural festival, dance party cleanup. You know, I'm out of time here. There were a lot of other things I kind of wanted to mention or share, but more than anything else, I wanted to talk about, you know, really art and these creative things. They're like these little treasures of hope that we can place everywhere, and they can make a functional difference in the way we do all of our other work. Our architecture, our neighborhood relationships, supporting small businesses. And so when you have that own creative impulse, definitely invest in your work. This is something I found yesterday. I'll leave that up there afterwards. But I wanted to share that because I think when you place that faith and hope in your own creative impulse, it helps others do the same in their own lives. And that's a way of turning your individual passion and compulsion to make a positive difference into an army of difference. And it's a really, really beautiful thing to see when people just start running with it on their own. So thank you for your time here today.
Matt, that was really excellent. We appreciate your time. Thanks everyone for joining us. I hope that you'll come back and see us next month when we have Imani Badil, who's going to give a talk on spaces times cooking section. She's talking about non-phosphorus support network. Sounds technical. What she's really talking about is the way that urban food systems can have a positive or an adverse impact on the health of the Great Lakes Basin. So I hope you'll join us on October 21st. Until then, hope to see you again. Bye.
Does anybody have any questions? I know you probably have something to go to at school. Yeah. Please, yeah. I think it's going to be powerful when we start to measure some of that stuff and see the impact of it. I mean, you can still do art for art's sake, but it's interesting when it can be strategically designed for the audience that will be like living with it. Thanks. Any others? I hope. Oh. It's. I'm actually. I'll bring it up and kind of show it to you here in a second. Let's see if this just auto plays here. The silent disco dust up might be my favorite. We were like, neighborhood cleanups need to happen. People aren't going out and doing this anymore. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong one here. I liked it because what we did was we gave everybody a pedometer for free, and we tracked how many steps people were taking, and it didn't matter if they were cleaning up or if they were dancing. And we gave out prizes every 15 minutes. We managed it like a marathon with someone kind of at the front and at the back, so we didn't lose anybody, so people didn't go in the street. And it literally, like, we had people travel from Pittsburgh to come out and do this neighborhood cleanup with us just because it was like a DJ dance party cleanup. I wish you could hear the music playing on this too. It was really fun. I should actually say I'm probably proudest of the pool projects. Both of Akron's public pools were scheduled to be demoed. The most urgent one, Perkins Woods Pool, the city was really reluctant to let us do any work on it because they were like, what's going to be the point? We're just going to get rid of it. We power washed the facilities. We added asphalt art onto all of the main concrete walls, and average pool attendance from 2017 to 2018 changed from 15 visitors at peak times in the summer to over 100. In fact, the pools had to close down repeatedly every week because they were in excess of 300 people arriving, and they did not have the staff to actually manage it. That was one of the reasons I was really excited about the project, because literally the city just turned around. I have an interview with the mayor where he was like, I've come full circle. We are going to be reinvesting in pools. You know, the city understood very clearly, not splash pads, like pools and splash pads are a big thing. And I think it's $19 million that's going into that right now, those two pool facilities. So that's kind of exciting. I think those things are cool. We did not invest in anything that wouldn't be maintenance free for 10 years. We put anti-graffiti coating on all of our murals. We used weatherproof MDO board and sealed it on the sides and mounted it with Tapcon screws on masonry. We only had one piece that got vandalized out of over 100 murals. And a local tattoo parlor artist was walking his dog and wiped it off the very same day that it happened. And that was in the most heavily vandalized area, one of them in Akron. So, I mean, people go there just to tag it, and it's completely changed. Something you brought up about going down the streets, I think it's also worth noting, like, when we do this work and when we see each other in the environment, it makes us feel like more of a community. It humanizes it. For a lot of the people, when we were in Buckeye Shaker going down the streets, they were like, what are these college kids doing out here? I mean, you know, we don't live there. They've never seen us before. And when we would talk to them about what we were doing and why, they would express their frustrations. They've been calling the city for 15 years about the sidewalks and nothing was ever getting done. From the city's perspective, the sidewalks are not their responsibility. It's actually the property owner's responsibility. So it's this tough position, but there are ways to address it. And just us being there gave them kind of some hope. And it was cool because we go out like the next week and we talk to a different neighbor on a different street. They'd be like, oh, my friend Sally told me about you guys. I thought I might see you out here. And it was neat that word got around, that there are these people out here who are trying to do something, and that we're really committed to trying to fix it. We don't overpromise, but by just bringing transparency to that issue and accountability, it's given a lot of them a sense of empowerment. I mean, they're showing up to meetings and showing these maps and just saying like, yeah, let's do this. Burton Belcar, they've already done, I think, 14 neighborhood cleanups this year, which I think is 7 times the number that they had ever done before. And our maps were part of what was being shared to help them plot the course for that. Like that Silent Disco cleanup, like that was meant to clean up the in-between areas. Most neighborhood cleanups only go in like the catch-all areas or like, the high visibility ones, or side of highways. To go down the individual streets and get the stuff intercepted before it gets anywhere else, that was really cool. I'll put this on the back end. Any other questions? Yeah. Really, really good point. So we're kind of lucky. I think it's cool that Sherwin-Williams is here. I talked to a lot of their guys and product manufacturers about the specs on everything. Only painting in certain conditions, obviously. Winter activities is something that I think Ohio is trying to take a look at. In Buffalo, our activity book had multiple pages exclusively focused on winter recreation, fire pits, like what kind of events, hot chocolate days, all kinds of things to keep people coming out. It's an interesting challenge and a kind of cool opportunity. In Akron, I think during wintertime, our play toured, we took to the men's and women's correctional facilities. We took to some retirement homes. We still did projects where we were forced inside a lot, but that still was important. There's a whole series of murals we curated with community members on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's death that were about economic disparity, education disparity, and health disparity. And those murals they hang in City Hall. Like when you walk up the stairs and you go into City Council chambers, they are right there. And it's all quotes with input from the community. And I think those little things, they can be a responsible contributing factor, I believe. Thanks, everybody. If any of you would like to check out any of those activity books, I'll leave them over here. You can't take them with you.